We have it. We're here. This is Snakes and Stogies episode 227, the first show of 2025. I know it's been a little while. I think it's been at least 4 weeks since we did a show. Holidays. The first half of this month for me, work-wise, has been nuts. So it's mellowing out now finally, to where I don't have anything on my schedule that requires me to do stuff for work at home, as far as making things and whatnot. So we are back. Phil is not here this evening because Phil is in Vegas for work, because I guess we've traded off on the work duties. So Bill Bradley is filling in, pun intended. And we are brought to you by Full Face Apparel, fullfaceapparel.com. Use the code THN. Get 15% off your order. That is the exclusive promo code for THN listeners and viewers like you. And then cold-blooded caffeine. You need coffee. You need that Snakes and Stogies blend. It's pretty damn cold in here right now, and I wish I had some of this on hand. Instead, I have my usual cold beverage. But Rwanda and Mexico coming together in one bag. Who would have known that the diplomacy was there to make something so glorious? We are still in the process of tacking Black Box as to whether we are still partnered with them this year. It sounds like we are. We're just in the process of sort of working out some details. But we do love Black Box, obviously. Please check them out. Facebook, Instagram, blackboxcages.com. And we are starting this year off with some sand boas and some other odds and ends. Bill, do you have any updates? What have you been doing? I feel like I haven't seen you in a long time.
Well, a lot of people probably haven't seen me in a long time. The whole family, aside from Milana, is all in Pennsylvania now. So she is in college. So she's going to school in Illinois. Everything is moved. It's all winter mode. I can actually do podcast type things in the basement with the creatures now. I wasn't able to do that before. And so there's a humongous retic in front of me. There's a big red tegu there. There's a very angry Argus monitor there. Yeah, I have been obviously absent from Lizard Brain Radio for some time due to moving and work. I work for the government, and I transitioned to working closer to Washington, D.C., and a bunch of other stuff I don't talk about on podcasts. And so that has kept me very, very occupied, and that stuff started to slow down, notwithstanding today's festivities. I actually didn't have to work that, which was cool, and so I'm able to do a podcast with you guys, and then should be able to continue forward more on a normal Lizard Brain THN schedule, now that work and life are somewhat stable. We will see. For folks who remember, Justin was literally making fun of me right before we went live about doing these podcasts from hotel rooms all over the place. The change in leadership today might push me out again, but I know that I can do shows when I travel. Hopefully I get back down to Tucson, see some more of the THN Kerp. So yeah, I should be back to normal, hopefully.
I had people message me. They're like, when's Bill coming back and doing LBR again? And I'm like, Bill has a very legit excuse in the fact that he's on the road all the time.
I hated it because I know a lot of podcasts kicked off during COVID, and then that's the stereotype, is that they die or whatever. That wasn't mine. It wasn't I got bored during COVID. Like Lizard Brain had a lot of episodes and a lot of traction, and I still have, I get my metrics still. It's still, honestly enough, my international metrics went up during my little absences and stuff. Almost certainly due to the Ipers, obviously. I still talk with them quite a bit, as we all do, and so I assume that their push was a big part of my international numbers. So
yeah. How's the collection move? Everything went smooth there, and
yeah. Everything here is cool. Our yard is very different, and so it took a lot of tortoise proofing. But we got through that. We have gone through the phases again of, are you hosing off a 17-foot retic in your driveway right now? Yes, I am. This is who my family is. We're still doing shows. Indy and I have done a bunch of weird stuff, corporate parties, like things closer to the Capitol. There's a lot of different businesses and stuff out here that didn't know about us. Done a bunch of schools and stuff like we always do. And so, yeah, the shows have continued. The collection's pretty much chilling because it's winter time.
Mm-hmm.
I fed everybody that eats Pangea right before we started. We cleaned a bunch of snakes today. So there's the Giganto retic who clearly one rabbit wasn't enough. Yeah, and I'm in a state now that is cooler with crocodilians and venomous. I still don't have any venomous, but with the gators and stuff like that, they've gone to some schools out here in Pennsylvania. They went to a Boy Scout thing.
Less red tape.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier. I still record everything for, insurance and all the adult stuff you got to do, but I don't have the state steps when it comes to the gators. So
I never thought about that. Do they make you record it like no matter where you are?
Yeah. So when we were in Illinois, even to own them, doing the shows is a requirement, and you had to have a minimum of 6. They had to be bona fide educational. You had to articulate that. You had to record that. And then, as always with herpetoculture, people doing some of the stuff they shouldn't have been doing. They really got very strict with what they identified as educational. So that wasn't ever an issue for us, but a lot of people struggled with it. And now that I'm here, it was just a little harder to explain Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, your youth group or whatever. They didn't always consider that educational, which kind of sucks.
Really?
And so now that I'm here, I can do a little bit more. We went to an elderly place. That's not so much educational, but it's really cool for those folks to be able to do it. So that part's nice.
Dude, I did that once with someone had asked me to do a talk at an old folks home, and I assumed when I went that it was just to set up a table and kind of hang out in the lobby and people could kind of check it out as they were coming and going or whatever. And I got there and it was straight up like a room full of people waiting.
Oh yeah.
Like a classroom type thing where it's like I had to physically get up and talk to people, and it was wild. Like it was funny because they were so enthralled and interested in all of it. There wasn't really anybody that was
especially people in their 80s and 90s, man. Yeah. They were not, especially if they weren't in the hobby anyway.
Right.
None of them saw the rise of cresteds and balls, and now kids just go to a reptile show. Like that's absent from their worldview anyway, let alone now that they've been in a facility for 10 years or whatever. So yeah, when we've done those, it's been like pretty awesome. They little kids obviously freak out when you get out the big Burmese python or whatever. People in their 80s lose it, man. You get out a giant python. And
I didn't even have any of that. I had a baby children's python, a rainbow boa, I think a corn snake, maybe a Baird's. And like when I pulled out that children eye, and I was like, this is a python. This is like one of the smallest pythons in the world. And they were like, it doesn't get 20 feet. Like, no. It was funny. And just the whole thing of like expecting it to be one thing and then getting there and it's the complete opposite. And especially when you're not big on public speaking, because this was also, like 2016 maybe, if not past that. And like when you're not expecting and you're not thinking about having to do the public speaking thing, and then all of a sudden it's like there's a room of 60 plus people and they're like, go get them, Tiger. It was like, oh shit, I was like, okay. But it worked out. It was fun. I completely forgot about that until you had mentioned, going to a nursing home or assisted living. And
we actually do quite a few of those. And I have several more on the books now out here. not obviously kids is the bulk of it,
Yeah.
but yeah, when they start scheduling events and all those things, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I think over time, at least, and I'm sure you could speak to this better than I could, but it seems like the public perception of reptiles and snakes in particular seems to be sort of rotating to be much more of a positive thing now, because
Oh
we have
yeah.
we have that little hognose snake at work, and he's in a little 10-gallon tank, and he's the work mascot now, and like people come in there and they're curious, and we tell them it's a little hognose snake that's in there because he's not always out, especially now. He's been hiding pretty much full time with the cold and stuff, but people are actually interested. Like I think I've had maybe 2 people that were like, no thanks, I don't want to see it, but there's been a ton of people that are just like want to check it out and want to see them. And,
the wild kratts generation is growing up.
Yeah,
we're the Steve Irwin and that generation, and now the wild kratts generation they're growing up. It's
just interesting. And we have regulars now that when they come in, they're, what's Wilson doing? It's just really cool to see that there's this big shift, across ages and demographics and stuff, of people that are genuinely curious rather than ready to run out the building. So, but we are here to get into some sand boas. This has been an episode we've had in the works for a minute, and schedules have, gotten fairly chaotic, but we finally made it happen. I'm glad that we're starting the year off with this. If you guys have listened to the podcast over the past couple months, going on a year now, I got into rough-scaled sand boas and have a small group of them and really enjoy them. And then come to find, as I was getting into them and researching, that there's not a ton of information out there, like history information, like detailed information. It's all fairly like, yeah, cool, there's Kenyans and they're like this, and then it's like, oh yeah, and then there's these rough-scaled sand boas, and like those are cool too, but these have more colors and these are doing all the things, so they get kind of pushed to back into the shadow of Kenyans. And so then I came across Mr. Rob Robbins, who is our guest this evening, either on Instagram or Morph Market. I think it was a little bit of both, because I checked the rough-scaled sand boa section on Morph Market fairly regularly, and saw that he had a good bit for sale, and then found him on Instagram, started talking a little bit, met him at Daytona last year, and was like, who better to talk about Conicus than Rob? So,
well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I actually could probably think of a few people better, actually a lot of people better, but I'm still happy to be here and be an ambassador for roughs, because they're incredible snakes, man.
Yeah, it's like I was saying before we started recording, it's kind of like, what's the best way to put it? It's like Brettles pythons. Like they're never the focus of someone's, like a big focus of what they're doing. It's always like just a little side thing that they have. Or inlands, I guess, is a better example too for carpets. Like people have, their coastal projects, their jungles, like the morph stuff. And they're like, yeah, I got a pair of inlands that I'm going to do something with eventually, but I just enjoy them and have them, and they're kind of just there in the background. And I feel like rough scales are sort of in the same boat in terms of sand boas, especially with Kenyans, and as how much those have exploded over the years in terms of popularity and stuff. So I wanted to give Conicus a proper episode, and hopefully it helps people, because I love them. I think they're great. As a lot of you know, I'm very big on Indian herpetofauna, like, and their tarantulas and stuff as well, scorpions, like pretty much anything native to India I have an odd particular interest in, and these, of course, they fit right in with all that stuff as well. So
I've kept a lot of snakes in this life, and I've really enjoyed them all, but if push came to shove and you told me I could only keep one, I would keep roughs. And
really,
I'm straight up honest about that. I mean, I'm keeping a lot of different sand boas now, and they're the ones I'm obsessed with, and I can't really put a finger on it, but I think there's a lot of potential for them, in the sense that people think of animals getting traffic, and getting interest because of morphs and the like that's coming down the road. But even if there weren't morphs, just the natural variation in them, it's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, and we did an episode.
It's all natural variation, but
right. Yeah, we did an episode a couple months ago where we went on INAT and looked them up, and you could see the variation from east to west, north down. Like It's really cool, and they're very reminiscent of Brettles to me in that regard. Of like, there are some morphs, but it's really hard to beat just as they come. It's like as they are is at the top of the pick for me. So
yeah, I mean their natural range, as you've seen on iNaturalist, and if you look in the books and the literature, is enormous. And then the phenotypic variation, the appearance of these things across all those different habitats. We're talking from eastern Pakistan through all of northern India, more common in southern India. They're going all the way to eastern India and Bihar and Bengal, and then they're in Sri Lanka, and they're in the southern portions of Nepal. I mean, this is an area as big as half of the continental United States or more. And you think about like a species complex like rat snakes. I'm not saying that Conicus is a species complex, but I'm not saying that they aren't either, because they're understudied. They're not only underappreciated to a certain extent in the hobby, but they're understudied in part because their range is so huge, and they've not been collected very much because they're in a part of the world where Western science hasn't done as much collecting, and a lot of other parts of the world are doing that research now, but I don't know that it's on rust scales per se. And so there's a lot to be known.
Yeah, I'd imagine similar to, because I'm convinced that the Dion's rats as well, like the range on those is so huge, like there has to be some form of cryptic diversity going on there, like genetic separation and drift. I can't imagine a species that has a range that massive can all be the same thing genetically. Like surely they're close, but kind of like with green trees, where it's like there is some subspeciation that is legit and happening. I would not be surprised one bit if they came out and with rough scales, but also with Dion's, and said like there's actually a little bit of separation that can be happening here if we wanted it to, if the evidence suggested it.
Well, a lot of that, or most of that, honestly. I mean, I see Bill's got his natural history T-shirt on, and I work for a natural history museum, but I work on fish, and I'm familiar with systematics and how that process works. And if you go on to like a specimen portal, looking for all the specimens in museums that are digitized, and you look up for rough scales, you'll find 84 records, right? In all the museums in the world that at least are part of the largest digitization portal for museum records. And that's not enough to do a revision across that huge of an area. And, of those 84, I think when I was looking, probably something like 20 or 30 were listed as having no data. So that tells you right off the bat, those are just, animals from the trade that museums are happy to have just so you can see their morphology.
Right.
You can't use them for research. You don't know where they're from. You can't use them for a systematic revision. So there's a long way to go before anybody could even do a revision. And I think a lot of the time we don't understand how expensive it is to really study an animal's systematics or a particular taxon systematics. And it involves going to other parts of the world, collecting them, taking DNA samples, registering them in museums, or at least in some way that the records are kept straight, and then doing all the analysis, and then publishing all the data and seeing where it falls out. So it's a long ways off. Maybe when I retire from fish, I'll go back to graduate school in my 50s and 60s to study rough scale sambos in India. If anybody wants to bankroll that, I'm down. I need to find an advisor.
Bill will do it.
I talk about it all the time.
Security purposes.
I get told all the time that I should medically retire from my gig after all of my fun health stuff and go do nerd science. Dion's makes sense because of the size, but the difference, I would say, for the sand boas is when you talk about the region of the world, like Dion's is monster for the region, but that region is relatively connected. When you talk about the part, when you go from Pakistan, India, like the geographic features and differences are literally some of the largest in the world. So I could see the separation is probably, it's total guesswork, but it just based on what that place looks like on a map is there have got to be differences because there's no way that there isn't population separation just due to the geography of the place that you live. Whereas like when you look at Dion's, it's one of those like, I don't really want to walk the entire grassland of Russia into Mongolia and south, but I can. Like,
Right.
and so if you talk about just the flow of genes over time, like there might not be that much variation just because those animals didn't really struggle to travel necessarily.
Yeah.
Whereas given this animal, first of all, its morphology, and then secondly, the part of the world we're talking about, like I could definitely see, population pockets getting cut off
Mm.
fairly easily, to be honest.
And then on top of that, throw in several million years of time and all that. It changes all the orogeny
For
and
sure.
everything of mountains
Yeah.
rising and falling and rivers changing course and so forth.
Yeah,
So
if we're talking about green
fun.
trees in northern Australia being disconnected from Indo, and that was enough time to notice separation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the length of time that it took to fill that gap with water in this part of the world was literally making mountains. So, I mean, it's the differences are insane. So yeah, I mean, it would make perfect sense. Yeah.
And we get to keep these incredible animals in our homes. It's pretty cool.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I got turned on to roughs in the first place was Gary Schiavino had posted a video early on when he first started his YouTube channel. And I was like, man, those are really cool. Like I hadn't heard of them. I hadn't seen them. And knowing sort of what Gary keeps and what he breeds and stuff, I assumed that they were sort of some like really tough to obtain, like higher echelon kind of species, because Gary does have a lot of higher end and harder to find stuff. And he produced some, and I don't know, there was just something about him that stuck out to me. And then when my buddy here locally had this male for sale, he was interested in some corns or something for his kids. So I was like, I'm interested in these in rough scales, and if you want to trade, like I'll gladly trade you a handful of corns for this guy, because I was trying to downsize a little bit anyways. So we did that, and then shortly after, I won some auctions on Morph Market for for a female, and then ended up buying another pair. So I've got a couple of them. It should be 2.2. And I really enjoy them. Like I don't really have any plans on expanding anything else in the collection this year. But if I saw some rough scales for the right price that sort of piqued my interest, I'd definitely get more of those, just because they are so low maintenance and they are so much fun. But Rob, I mean, how did you get into herps, and how did you come to get to where you are now in terms of your collection and what you're keeping?
I think like a lot of people, I mean, it was just in me from a very young age. And I grew up as the son of very permissive parents, both ichthyologists, both fish people. And I mean, I remember seeing a scarlet king snake on my patio when I was a little kid. And I remember, I've got some art that I did in preschool. And it was like one of these clay fired pieces, and it's a snake. You're like 4 years old. So the one thing my parents did not permit me, I had a lot of aquaria, was having snakes in the house growing up, because they had all these birds. I mean, they had flight cages full of birds and stuff. They had a lot of animals. We had a lot of animals growing up. And they were afraid a snake would get out of its cage and crawl around at night and just cause what they call night fright in birds. And then all their expensive birds would be dashing their brains about. So I wasn't allowed snakes. My freshman year at the University of Miami, literally the first day in the dorm, my roommate and I were like, what do you want to do? And he said, let's go get a snake. And we went to Natural Selections. We bought a boa with money that was undoubtedly supposed to be used for a textbook or something, from Joe Wazalewski. And 2 months later, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm sure the statute of limitations has passed. My dad's grad student gave me a broad-banded copperhead.
Nice.
So I was keeping that in the dorms. And yeah, it just spiraled from there. And I've never not had snakes since I was 17 years old, and had a lot of other interests over the years, but snakes have always been a constant. And I got deep into the venomous stuff for a while and survived. I have all my fingers and all that's good. And Amir Soleimani has been a friend of mine since high school, we knew each other in high school, but we were friends in college. And he runs Miami Reptile Company, BSR auctions, stuff like that. And he gave me a pair of roughs in, I think, 2018, maybe 2017, coming back from Tinley. And you mentioned Brettles, Justin. It was funny because I didn't know if they were a gift or what, and we're never sometimes clear with the mirror. So I gave him a pair of Brettles in return. And then I had the roughs for 3-4 years, something like that. They're getting close to breeding. And then I stumbled on Martin Nowak's ads on fauna classifieds, and my mind was blown. He's got these reduced pattern things, those spotted stripes, and I was just like, oh my God. So I started buying animals from Martin, and then I started buying animals from Scott Miller, and I started buying animals from Terry Holler and our Kelly Holler. Shoot, I can't remember the first name right now. I think it's Terry. And just trying to find the nicest animals I could and started mixing them up. And it's just become an obsession. They're just cool. And then I started learning things about their natural history that just boggles the mind. I mean, people talk about them being difficult feeders. They're not difficult feeders. They know when they need to eat and they know when they don't need to eat. And the amount of time they can go without food is way out there on the fringe for vertebrates. So they're very cool snakes.
Yeah, I'm learning that currently with that male. So,
Well, I know
you
we
are-
have this as a question later on, so I don't want to spill the beans, but we can talk about some hardcore facts about that later if you want.
Oh, definitely. You are keeping other boas.
Yeah, I keep a lot of other sand boas. I have a lot of Kenyans. I mean, you kind of have to, and they're so beautiful, and there's so many different morphs and a lot of fun things to do with those. So I bought a bunch of animals from Holloway back in 21, 22, and I've gotten a bunch of other snakes from people like folks out in California. They got animals from Treacher, and I got a lot of snakes from Scott Miller, and kind of try to do the same thing, trying to pick some of the nicest snakes out there and start mixing and matching and making some of my own stuff and line breeding some things. So a lot of Kenyans. I started getting some Russians that came from Vinaruso. I've got John Eye now. I've got
Nice.
2.3 John Eye, and I've always loved boa, just the genus boa. And I think for me, the pinnacle of those snakes, I mean, they're all cool, but I really like a nice longicauda. So I've done some breeding of pearls. I've done some breeding of longicauda. I even once crossed a pearl and a longicauda. I know there's going to get a lot of hate mail from that if anybody can find me. And that worked. That was pretty neat, as it should. They're both imperator, and yeah, I'm focused on the longicauda. And then I've got some colubrids that, I used to do a lot with okatees, and I really like a nice okatee, and I've got some nice buckskin okatee now, and keep some Hondurans, honestly, just as trash cans. And they eat everything else doesn't. I don't feel like that's like a hygiene violation when they basically just live on their own and they will eat everything and nothing bad ever happens to them. So I've bred some Hondurans as well, but just because, after you fed them 250 mice in 3 years, you might as well get some eggs out of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Disposals.
Yeah, they're great for that. Is that everything? I don't. Sometimes you have to go through your head. I just did my whole FWC list a little while ago, so we could always.
Did you ever do anything with the Ks, like any of the Calkers or anything like smaller insular stuff?
No, never had those guys. I mean, when I was younger and I was keeping some boas, I was attracted to the big, colorful things, and now that I'm like of that stereotypical age set, where I'm a gray beard, 50-something guy, I should start doing some of those weirder, drabber colored snakes because that's what we do, right? But not yet.
Yeah, see, it was always the opposite for me. I always liked the small, like dwarf stuff. Like I had some Tarahumaras and a lot of Nicaraguans at one point. And never got into any of the Calkers or anything like that. And it seems like even now, I think Vin Rousseau just posted some for sale recently, and those are the first I've seen for sale in a long time. And I love that smaller, dwarf variety.
Yeah, I think probably out there on the list for me is Tarahumaras to have those at some point. Work with them. I have bred some Nicaraguans, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was something about those that I was just drawn to, like the Nicaraguans in particular. I don't know exactly what it was, but those just piqued my interest. I've never been a big boa guy, especially the South American stuff. That was always something that was just too much, too big. Not something I really wanted to devote the time and space to. But the smaller stuff, I was definitely interested in.
Well, of course, that big northern South America stuff, the tropical stuff, is among the most demanding, right? And of course, you have to wait many years sometimes to get them to reach sexual maturity. So it's a much bigger investment of time and resources. which is why, of course, nice captive Peruvians and Surinams and stuff command the prices they do, rightly so.
Yeah. So going back to, natural history and taxonomy and things like that, where do you stand with the whole Eryx Gongyliophis sort of debate? Because I see Conicus, rough scales, listed as Gongyliophis, but then reading Treacher's book, he basically said that it's kind of universally not accepted that they're Gongyliophis.
Well, I'm going to preface my answer by talking about fish. All right.
Okay.
So in my day job, I work in a natural history museum and I'm an ichthyologist, and I manage an enormous collection of preserved fish that are used for systematic work, right? But lots of other things now, because it's the modern world and we can get all kinds of information out of natural history specimens. That's why museum specimens were there in the first place, right? Going back to the early, like, Victorian cabinets of curiosity and so forth. And I just got done updating all of the names in a database of fishes and using the online catalog of fishes, which is great because it tracks all of the literature about the type specimens of the 60, 70,000 names that have been applied to fishes over the years that result in 37,000 odd valid species, right? And I changed all of these higher classifications along the way too. Like, I established new genera in there, and I put in new families, and I put in the new orders, all this stuff that's changed over the last 25 years. And so I say all this to preface a conversation about Eryx versus Gongyliophis to say there's always going to be new data, there's always going to be new information, and then we make the changes, or scientists make the changes, lay people make the changes, anybody can publish. Based upon that new data, right? And right now, the data say, and right now is based on a paper in 2014, that without Conicus in the genus Eryx, it's paraphyletic, it's not monophyletic, it's not an ancestor in all its descended species, which is another fancy way of saying these things are all descended from one species based upon the data we have found and published so far, so they belong in one genus. Mm-hmm. Now, if somebody comes along later with more information and more data, we just got done saying there's very little in the way of specimens of Conicus, which is, as far as I understand, I think it is the type species for that genus for Gongyliophis. I think Gongyliophis was erected for Conicus. You get more data on Conicus, whether you're doing a revision of just that species and determining there's 1, 2, 3, 10 species, and you get more data along the way that say, hey, these things, not only are there more species, but you can diagnose them distinctly from all Eryx, then Gongyliophis would probably come back into use again. So sorry, I could be really long spoken, but it's just to say these things are never settled, right? And that's why, you grow up with rat snakes being Elafi, and then they become Pantherophis, and your yellow rat snake is now the eastern rat snake. It's not even, an Elafi quadrivittata or anything like that. It's now Pantherophis alleghaniensis, and there's a sense and there's a beauty to it, and I do love systematics, but it's never done. It's never finished. So you just go with the flow.
It's never finished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, or this was just a really long dodge on my part.
No.
So you were saying at work, what prompted you to go through and redo all of these things? Is that a periodic thing, or is that how did that come to be?
That's a great question, Bill, because it should be a periodic thing, but the fact of the matter is most of those collections in natural history museums of, let's say, vertebrates, but it could be any animals, it can be plants. The specimens themselves are arranged phylogenetically on the shelves, right? So like all your boids are together, and all your pythonids are together, and all your colubrids are together, right? When you move a collection, though, is typically when you go about updating that arrangement, because to move it in place is just too costly and too time consuming, right? It'd be like if you had 10,000 snakes alive in your garage or downstairs in your basement, and you wanted to keep them all organized, and every time you went out and got some more colubrids, you're like, oh damn, I don't need more space for the colubrids though, so I got to move the pythons over and steal some space from the boas, and then I have space for the colubrids. So now they're all in the correct order, right? Well, it's not feasible to do that from a practical standpoint when you're talking about, in the case of the collection, I managed 2.5 million specimens and 240,000 containers. So we moved the collection to a new building and got rid of that whole phylogenetic arrangement. Yeah, with 140 tons. It's 140 tons of jars of fishes. So we moved that whole collection. Took us 2 years. We still got another year to go with a bigger specimen. And when we did that, we got rid of phylogeny. We were using the computer to track phylogeny, right? No, sorry, that's me typing. That's me pretending to type on the desktop here. And then arranged everything by container size and barcoded it, right? So now we scan things. We know exactly where they are. And so once we did that, I said, okay, now we can just update all the taxonomy in the database by that standard, that Eschmeyer's catalog of fishes. And there's standards for reptiles and amphibian names as well. There's multiple because they don't all agree. So you have to go to like reptile database and amphibia web, and there's all these different groups of experts that disagree. But yeah, sorry, that's what prompted us to, or prompted me to start updating those names.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fun. I like it.
I mean, I would hope so. It's a 2-year project.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's a big collection of fish specimens, for sure. But back to reptiles, back to snakes in particular.
Yeah, I mean, with Conicus, have you, having only had them for, a year, was there ever a point where they had more popularity than they do currently? Like, were they ever in that sort of cyclical phase that we see with so much?
I mean, I don't think so, but I'm not saying that because, I'm some kind of expert on Conicus. I'm just saying that from the standpoint of a guy who's, been keeping herps for 35 years or something like that. So 35 years, God, yeah. No, I don't think that, at least in that time, since I got into herps in like 1990, I don't think they've ever been as popular as they are now. But that's also hard to tease apart from the fact that, as you guys were saying before we even, or I guess in your early remarks, herps are a lot more popular than they ever have been before. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't think they've ever been super popular, and I'm not quite sure why. I don't know. I mean, I get the impression that people think that they're bitey, and certainly some individuals are, but on the whole, they are not. In fact, if you look, you probably have this book, Justin, but I think it's Reptiles of India. I thought I even pulled it out.
I don't have that book, but I need to find it.
The Book of Indian Reptiles and Amphibians. And in here, sometimes Indian authors will describe things in sort of British terms because of British colonialism, and they describe the snake as phlegmatic in disposition. And I had to look that up, right? But it really just means like stolid, just reluctant to do anything, including to bite, right? And they're just, sometimes, they'll jerk like an East African will.
I need a library run since you brought up a book. Got to check.
Yeah.
Okay. And I have had some that are bitey. And I say bitey because I mean, it's not like, especially with the young ones, not like it's really a big deal. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think people maybe have that impression, or they have the impression that they're just brown snakes and that they're kind of drab. And we're seeing with all the phenotypic variation that's just naturally occurring, and now people breeding for some morphs, if you will, like Scott Miller's got what he calls his hypo or his caramel. I think those are separate lines. Mm-hmm. He's got aneries. I think Martin Nowak has aneries. Martin produced the spotted stripe, and there's a lot I think that's getting ready to break. Now it'd be great if somebody would have an albino pop out, because albinos apparently are fairly common in the wild, and I found at least 4 scientific publications that show pictures of albinos from different parts of India, and the albinism looks like it's more than one type as well.
Really?
Yeah, I can share some of those with you later if you want. They're gorgeous snakes.
The yeah, I don't know, because I've read conflicting things on them as well, where people were like, you know, they're bitier, a little more high strung than sort of your, you know, your Kenyans or whatever you want to compare them to. And then I've also read like they're some of the most chill sand boas. My male, the adult male that I have is, I think any sand boa, once you have them sort of above ground, they seem to be extremely uncomfortable and do not seem to enjoy being pulled out of their substrate and outside of that. And I can definitely tell that male if I pull him out, he's definitely nervous, and he's tense, and he will, you know, take a couple swings if he feels the need to. The babies, my smaller ones seem to be kind of, maybe it just depends on the day. Some of them I can pull them out and they seem okay, and then the smaller male in that group, he's a little more high strung too. So I don't know if maybe it's like males being more high strung than females. Have you noticed anything like that in terms of, or is it?
I have noticed that the adult females are very low key by and large. So I have 2 females that I got. They were pet store finds, and I tracked down their origin, and they were animals that Doug Foster, the late Doug Foster, he was a big name in Florida herps, brought back to Gainesville from a show in Texas, and they're pretty irascible, those 2. But they've calmed down since I started feeding them, and I bred one of them last year, and that litter, she had a litter of 8, nice size litter, not the biggest, and all of those babies were bitey. It's just like,
Really?
what is with these guys? And I produced about 50 rough scales this past year, and all the other animals from the other litters, none of them were biters. Just but that one litter, they're all biters. So I don't know if there's just I don't know how to explain that. What'd you get for us, Bill?
I was looking to see if I had India. I don't. I have northern Pakistan.
Oh, look at that.
So
Contribution
that
to
was
northern Pakistan.
That was not what I was thinking. Sorry.
Close.
I knew I had a handful of different ones that I had recently gotten, but I went digging, and that's what I came up with. So.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. This is, everybody knows Reptiles of the World Ditmars going back a long, long way.
It's like the 70s, isn't it?
Oh,
or no, I'm thinking of the Mertens.
Oh yeah, so that's funny you mentioned Meritons, like living snakes of the world? No,
with the emerald on the cover.
Yeah, I mean that was our catalog when we were in the early '90s. That was our catalog. That and the Crutchfield mailers we would get, and the Glades Herp mailers. But yeah, so in Ditmars, gosh, I want to say Ditmars is like, that's my dad's copy. He probably had this when he was a kid. I don't know. This is get the year here in a minute, but he commented on their disposition, and he said none of the specimens tried to bite when handled. These are probably wild-caught animals too. So, yeah. And that was his experience. And I don't know how many specimens he handled. Maybe he handled 3, right? Maybe he handled 300. Don't know. Anyways, so I would say they're even-tempered snakes. They're can they bite? Yes, of course, all snakes can bite. We all know that.
Yeah. How are you keeping yours? Like, how do you prefer to have them as far as substrate goes? Temperatures, all that, the whole rundown.
They're really hardy, and I keep them on a mix of shredded pine and cypress mulch. And cypress mulch is a blend, and you can get it at a local hardware store. I get it at Lowe's, and I just keep that in there just because I think they like a little more texture. I don't know why. I just feel that way. And of course, it's nice because it'll hold a little more humidity when you need it to. And so I'll start pairing here on February 1st. That's when I put them together.
Okay.
And then they start producing litters in first week of June. I keep the biggest females in V70s because I like my snakes to have some space, and they're huge. The biggest females I have are about 30 inches, and I haven't weighed them closely in a while, but the big ones are 800 to 900 grams. and they're eating 100, 110 gram rats, just pounding them, you know. And I'll
Wow.
feed them heavily after they produce babies. So, you know, like a large female might eat a dozen to 1,500 gram rats from June until December. Start her all over again. The males, you know, much smaller tubs. I do have one male that's close to 300 grams because he was sold to me as a female and I fed him like a female. And I hadn't checked, right? And so yeah, he's huge, but most of my males are more like, you know, 150 grams, maybe 200 grams at most. And I've got a proven breeder caramel from Scott Miller that's 62 grams. So, you know, they can be quite small. So I'm not sure if that answered the question
Yeah,
about
the
how I'm
size
keeping them,
difference
but yeah,
is
yeah,
comical.
I keep them in tubs, and you know, the babies I keep in little pencil tubs or double wide pencil tubs, and move them up to something a little bigger after about you know, 5 months or so. And you know, all my babies I feed whatever I have. I've always felt like give them everything they want and get them a good start. And I breed my own mice, and so I can do that. And roughs are great feeders, no problems with eating. You know, I throw live mice in there. I mark a little, you know, their pinkies, no harm to the snake, and I mark everything, and I come back later, and you know, 90% of them have eaten first time. So easy to get them going.
What kind of are you offering them heat, or are you keeping them ambient?
Yeah, everything's got thermostatically controlled heat tape, and so with these females here, you know, the ambient in the room they're in will be quite cold February 1st, but I'll push the heat back up to about 86 from say 78 to 79. And, you know, at 78 to 79 for the heat tape in a room that's sometimes dropping to 54 at night, you know, that temperature in that tub is more like 70 or 68. But, you know, again, you look at like their latitudinal distribution, they can take the cold. These guys are tough. I've talked to Martin Nowak about that. I think he said he's had them down in the 40s. So super tough snakes. So once I'll get these females going at about 86, and I'll gradually push them up to about 93. And around that same time, the room they're in will start to heat up naturally. You know, I'll adjust it a little bit myself, and you know, by the time they're producing litters in June, you know, it'll be 85 in the room and 93 in their spot. The other thing that's crazy about these females, when they start to ovulate and when they become pregnant, they get so huge, they turn on their sides and sometimes turn on their backs. You go in, you open up the tub and you're like, she's dead. The snake is laying there on her back. I mean, it is grotesque how enormous they get. Just another thing they do.
I mean, the neonates in comparison to Kenyans, I mean, there is a sizable difference there from, because I've kept Kenyans in the past. It's been a really long time, but I've had baby Kenyans, and like the baby Conicus compared to the Kenyans, man, they're so much more robust.
They're definitely, you know, a stouter bodied snake, but the size of them, you know, talking to somebody like Martin, and, you know, maybe in a year, you guys will want to come back around and do Conicus again, and do it with a guy like Martin, who's, you know, been keeping these things almost as long as I've been alive. And I keep bringing him up because he's been very, very generous with his time and his knowledge, and has shared a lot of information with me. He's had dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of litters over the years. And he says some females, and I'll make sure I get this straight, you know, will produce small litters of large babies, and others will produce large litters of small babies. But it isn't always that way. You can have small litters of small babies and large litters of large babies. And so, again, a lot of just variation in these animals, not just in their appearance, but in their seemingly in their biology.
And have you noticed, as far as feeding goes, because I am curious, like my stuff, my whole room stays ambient, and currently in the day, I mean, I have this heater on. Usually I stole it for tonight because it's freezing here. And it's doing nothing for me. I don't know why I bothered. The ambient in my room is probably in the low 80s, upper 70s, sort of on the cooler end. And I haven't had any issues with the younger ones eating. They don't refuse unless they're I've noticed if they're in a shed cycle, it's a little more hit or miss, but for the most part, I can just drop feed frozen thawed and they're gone by morning. But again, that adult male I have, like I've had him for going on a year and he has yet to take a meal for me. And I've tried live because I also breed my own rodents. I've tried live in a couple different sizes between mice and rats with no signs of interest at all. And then I've tried frozen thawed, drop fed, just completely ignored. Does you think temperature has any effect on that, or is it just because it's a boy and he's got other things on his agenda?
I think it's more the latter, particularly with the males, but there may be other stuff going on as well. So I'm going to go through a little story here quickly. And again, it's going to start with fish. But my friend Eric Hilton was here years ago, and he's at Virginia Institute of Marine Science. He's a fish guy, and he had with him a herpetologist named Al Richmond. And Al is at UMass, and Eric said, hey, Rob's into snakes, and he keeps these iracines and so forth. And Al said, man, I knew this other guy who kept rough scales, and I don't remember the details, but he forgot about them or something like that. And 4 years later, they checked on this pair of rough scales. Nobody had fed them. Maybe nobody had watered them. I doubt the latter. So this whole part's pretty anecdotal, but we're going to get down to the actual brass tacks here in a second. And he said these things went 4 years and they lived. That's crazy. That's wild. And I was keeping the roughs at the time, and I didn't think too much about it, but I became very interested in it when I ended up with a male. I have a male right now that's gone 17 months without eating. He looks fine, Justin. He hasn't lost any weight. Wow. So because I had this male, I got to know more about this. I'm seeing this firsthand now. Not 4 years, but I'm seeing it firsthand. So I contacted Eric again. I said, hey, you remember Al talking about this guy? Who's this guy? He goes, oh, yeah. Okay, it's Nate Klee. He's a herpetologist at Stony Brook in New York. And so I emailed him. I said, hey, what's going on? This is what I heard. And he wrote me back next day. And this is what he said. He said, I got a pair of rough scales from Lloyd Lemke in the early 80s, and I raised them up. And in the 90s, I fed them to breed them, and I fed them like you would to breed them. And by the time 2000 rolled around, I thought they were both quite fat, and I didn't want to lose them to being fat. So I decided I would stop feeding them. And they went 46 months without feeding, and there was no visible change in their weight. So I thought, that's long enough. And he started feeding them again. And he said the female ate, and only then did she start to lose a little weight, which he attributed to an upregulation of her metabolism, right, which had been downregulated. And she was now needing to burn calories. So that was from 2000 to 2004. They went 46 months, this pair, without eating. So from 2004 to 2017, he wasn't breeding them. He's an academic. He's doing other things, but he's still keeping snakes. And he was feeding them, he said, monthly-ish. In 2017, he said, these guys look fat again. I'm going to fast them. 7 years, nothing to eat. He started feeding them again in 2024, this last year, because he said finally the female started to lose weight without having upregulated her metabolism. She just started losing weight from not eating for 7 years, and they started eating again. 7 years. That blows my mind. I mean, 46 months blows my mind.
Yeah.
I've got this. So here's the thing. Martin and I talk about this with these male Conicus, and you sell them to people, and they say they're not eating. Not eating means unhealthy. Not eating means a problem. Well, it can in some snakes. Certainly if your corn snake or your milk snake is not eating, or your boa constrictor is not eating, you could have a problem. But with these rough scales, if they're not losing body weight, say just leave them alone. Don't worry about it, right? So that male I have that went 17 months, I go around, I'm feeding all these snakes, and I'm these little markers and everything, and I had a marker on his cage, his bin. I opened the bin, and there was no mouse in there. I'm like, for 17 months, did he actually eat, or did I just screw up and put the shit, in the wrong place? So I don't really know. And since then, I've tried to feed him again, and he hasn't eaten. So I think maybe he didn't get offered a mouse, and I just misrecorded that he had been offered a mouse that night. So.
And do you notice any preference as far as live versus frozen when it comes to males that have been on a fast like that, or are they just
just individuals? The males, I can feed males like live hoppers, and I'm not worried, especially with those heavily keeled scales and stuff, about a mouse doing damage to them. But generally I just offer them fuzzies, or something a little bigger than a fuzzy, and I offer those live. And if they're not eaten, I either, give them back to the mother if I can remember which mouse bin it came out of, or I give it to the Hondurans, those greedy Hondurans. Snakes, milk snakes. Sorry, I'm coming from an academic culture. I don't want to get canceled for saying something I didn't say. Talking about snakes.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I'm not massively concerned about it by any means, because again, looking at him, checking in on him periodically, like he hasn't seemed to have lost any weight. Like physically, he looks the same as the day I got him. He was eating for my buddy who I got him from. And I told him, I was like, man, he's like, this thing hasn't touched a meal since I got it. And he's kind of freaking out. And he's like, dude, I don't know what happened. It was eating fine when I had it. And I'm like, I'm not worried about it because he's not losing any weight. And having chondros, and also, them being the same way, where it's like I could not feed them for a very long period of time and they'd be fine because their metabolism is almost non-existent. It's not that big of a concern. It's just one of those things with it being a newer species for me, not knowing what I should and shouldn't expect. And sort of being like, do I try it now? Like, when's he going to be ready?
Well,
so.
I think that's why a podcast like this is great, right? I mean, you just mentioned chondros. Justin, I didn't know that. I kept chondros in the late 90s when I could barely afford to keep chondros, and they wouldn't eat. And it stressed me out, man. I'm like, here's this snake that costs more than I make in 3 weeks, maybe more, and it won't eat. And to me, as a young man who didn't know much, and now I'm an older man who doesn't know much, I equated it to the snake was unhealthy, or I was doing something wrong and I shouldn't be keeping chondros. But yeah, I just didn't know. So when we share this kind of information, it makes it easier on everybody, and the animals get better care. That's not to say you shouldn't feed your rough scales if they're feeding. Feed them, but they'll tell you when it's time to stop. Now with this male I have, I'm gonna move him completely. Like I'm gonna change everything. I'm gonna change the humidity. I'm gonna change the lighting. I'm gonna change the heating, and just see if that triggers something in him. Or, as Martin has told me, with sometimes with females that won't eat, you breed them, right? And they're like, uh-oh, baby on board, need resources. They just start feeding ravenously.
Yeah, my plan with that male actually was, and I still would like to do it at some point, was to get a smaller tank, like an aquarium or exoterra or something, and deck it out to make it look natural, with just something little slice of somewhere in India, and offer some UV and just sort of see what he would do, like how he would prefer to do things. And UV being such a big discussion in herpetoculture and stuff over the last few years, it's just interesting to see how a fossorial species like that, if you offer it to them, like seeing the behaviors there, and seeing if there would be any change in terms of, would he have any more interest in food if he was set up that way, or just to see what would, how it would happen. Sambo is, I don't think that's a group in particular that a lot of people want to do the naturalistic setup with, just because I think people feel like it's kind of wasted on them. But it would be interesting to do it. And I got some rocks and stuff to actually do it, some flat pieces of slate and stuff, just to make it happen. It just hasn't yet.
Some of these sand boas, people don't realize, are really excellent climbers, which, is a funny statement to make given their morphology, right? They can't be a climber like a rat snake, right? But they can climb far better than a lot of people assume, given, their general shape. And I remember when, I won't say when it was, I'll say it was a long time ago, all right? And I had bred Kenyans, East Africans, and I put all the babies in a 29-gallon tank. You know how tall those are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's about a 15 or 18-inch top. I had no top on it because I was hanging a light directly above the sand, just hanging a lamp right in there. I came out to the room after all the lights had been out, and those sand boas had gone straight up out of the sand to the distance. They were able to just barely bridge the distance to that hanging lamp and get a chin on there. So it's probably about the length of the snake, from the sand to the where the lamp was hanging, 6-7 inches, something like that. Then they went around the lamp and then up the cord, like, an army ranger or something. And as I went in there, there was 2 or 3 of them that were wrapped around the cord, and there were four or five on the floor outside that had already made the trip out. Like, never in a million years did I think these fat, chunky, fossorial snakes would be able to get out of that cage. And there's like, see ya. There's a book by Stephen Spall's Sun, Sand, and Snakes, which is a great read about growing up as a kid really interested in herpetofauna and
I'll have to find
Kenya.
that one too.
Oh man, that is a classic. And he talks about a sand boa of an East African, a Kenyan colobrinus, falling out of a tree with a bird in its coils. So these guys are capable of a lot.
I think there was a paper released at some point within the last few years of that being documented. Someone came across a Kenyan that was eating a bird.
Yeah,
but it wasn't.
Well, and they'll lay an ambush for birds on the ground too. Yeah. But this one fell out of a tree. Right.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
One thing I do remember reading at some point or hearing at some point was that getting males to breed, there was some sort of, like, you had to have a second male, almost like what you have to do with Candoya.
I've heard of people doing it.
Have you noticed?
I haven't done it, and I haven't needed to, and I'm glad, because then you have the question of, well, who's the sire? And since these aren't morphs with known genotypes and stuff, and there's no obvious recessive trait or something like that, you won't know. I did make a couple pairings last year that didn't produce. Could those females have benefited, or those males have benefited from some competition? Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm happy producing as many as I am with just using single males.
I think I saw something else that said something about flooding cage.
Well, a lot of living things respond to environmental stressors. You burn melaleuca and some other trees and plants, and they reproduce or send their seeds into the air. But I don't know about flooding your cage to get your sand boas to breed. That seems pretty extreme.
Well, that may have been something Nipper had told me he had done with his sand boas at one point. However many years ago that was, but I don't know.
I mean, sometimes with sand boas, you're happy when there isn't a litter, right? Because the litter sizes can vary so much, and you try not to produce too many snakes. To find yourself feeding too many snakes, and there's not homes for them and stuff like. So, I've occasionally had litters that didn't come through. I'm like, that's just fine. I've got all that I can handle. And that's the other thing about ruffs, is that the literature will tell you that they have small litter sizes, and that's true except when it's not, which is a lot of the time. So I had a virgin female I bred this last year, and she was large. I got her to a really good size, at least 700 grams, 600 grams. And she had 15 babies. Perfect. Every single one are perfect. No slugs, no unfertilized ova, nothing. Knocked out of the park. 15. And my other big female has had 12, 11, and 13 or something like that in the first 3 years. And yeah.
So what do you find to be sort of the average?
That's probably, I've not had all that many litters. I got into these guys 7-8 years ago, and then really started producing multiple litters only in the last year or two. So I think somebody like Martin or Scott Miller might tell you that it's, or Mr. Holler, that it's probably lower in the single digits, because I think a lot of females will produce 2 or 3 or 4 babies. And I did have one litter this year. It was just 3.
Huh. The Mike is asking about the Russians, which we'll actually circle back to those in a second. But have you noticed, as far as when you in breeding Kenyans, do you find Kenyan babies to be more difficult to get going than Conicus? Because I feel like that's always, Kenyans do have this sort of, I won't say necessarily stigma, but it's not uncommon for people to talk about Kenyan babies being difficult to get going.
I don't know. I think I have the luxury of having, live mice. I've got a whole shed of mice that I care for intensely because they're the foundation of everything, right? And I always have baby live mice available. And I think most of the Kenyan breeders I know don't, and then still have no problem getting them to eat heated, warmed up, frozen, thawed. And a lot of people will tell you, like my friend Amir will say, just, it's hottest water you can stand for thawing it out, pat it dry, and then offer it. And they just go for that heat to the point you're like, God, that might burn them, but it's not boiling water, it's hot out of the tap. And yeah, they just go for the heat and hit it. I had one anery Kenyan that was born and didn't feed at all. Was born in August, and people told me, you don't give up, and fed for the first time in May. Now that animal lost a ton of weight. It went from probably, whatever, 8 grams when it was born at to probably about 3. I didn't weigh it because I honestly didn't think it would survive. Kept trying. I tried all my tricks, putting him in a sock and putting him in cups and live and brained and all this different stuff. Wouldn't do it. And then one night I just pulled out the tray, looked at it. I'm like, well, if that isn't a feeding posture, I don't know what is, and put in a live pinky and it ate it, and then it's never stopped. Started feeding in May and it's fed 50 times since then.
Wow.
And it's pretty much caught up with what its litter mates must look like now. They're all gone. I've sold those a while ago, but yeah.
Going back to females and breeding there, is there a particular age and or weight that you aim to hit before you pair them?
Yeah, for the roughs, I don't breed before they're 4 years old. And I mean, like a legit 4 years old, so they're born halfway through the year. So not in the year that they turn 4, but more like the year that they're turned 5. Can you breed them before then? Sure. Will you get the outcomes you want that year and the years to come? I think those outcomes will be suboptimal.
Yeah.
So I try to get them big. And I've got a female that I got from Holler that is entering its 3rd year. She's entering her 3rd year and she's almost 700 grams. I've never known a snake eat like this. It's just insanity. And I wouldn't feed her like that if she wasn't still growing. I don't want her to be fat.
Right.
So could I breed her this year? Probably. I'm not going to. I mean, I really like how she looks. She's a beautiful snake. She's got all the hallmarks of a long-lived good breeder if I don't rush it. So that's the other thing. So those snakes that Nate Klee had that that went 7 years and 4 years, 46 months and 7 years without eating. So nearly 11 years of their lives without eating at all. He got those in the early 80s. He has them now, right? Martin Nowak has a female he bred last year that he's had for 39 years, and he got her as an adult. So these are roughs we're talking about.
Wow.
Again. But, right? And if you read, the Treacher book on sand boas, he talks about a guy in there, I can't remember who it is, who, has a quote unquote Egyptian Sambo and East African Kenyan that was, breeding at 35 years, producing good litters. So, I mean, these snakes live at least 40 years and possibly a good bit longer than that.
Yeah. It's overfeeding's a whole episode in itself, but yeah, it's when, you look at chondros being another good example of just, they can run off so little that it's hard to sort of let your guard down and say, like, it's okay that it hasn't eaten in, 2 months, 3 months plus, a year, 2 years, whatever. If the animal's physically looking fine and isn't showing any signs of any issues, like, then don't fight it. Just, let it do its thing.
Where were you when I needed you back in 1998?
I'm pretty conservative on feeding my chondros, period, just because that's not meant to be a fat, heavy snake.
Right.
They're not meant to be heavy, they're smaller and lighter. That in natural history, again, that's something that we've talked about a lot over the years on the podcast, is like the best care sheet is the natural history information you can get. It's not what the pamphlet at PetSmart or Petco has for you, but like, what are they finding in their natural habitat? what are the numbers for the individuals they're looking at, and then follow that. Like the natural history book that Julander and Terry Phillip put out for green trees, to me, was like a complete game changer, because it's like, this is saying to do exactly the opposite of what traditionally people have said to do. And if you do that, I mean, they do great.
What book is that? What are the authors?
It's Justin Julander and Terry Phillip.
All right, look that up.
It's on Amazon.
Justin Julander.
It's green tree.
You might be able to message Justin and get it direct.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you may.
There's a paper on green tree python. They did like feeding studies of them in the wild in northern Australia. It's in that biology of the pythons book that came out 20 or 30 years ago. And I remember reading that, and they talked about how the adults are way, at least in this one study, are way up in the canopy, and the babies are way down low. And this, that's an older study, so I'd like to know more. And I guess the babies were eating maybe more skinks.
Yeah.
I don't remember. Yeah. And the adults up in the trees were eating whatever they're eating 75 meters up. So I actually,
and that's even the recent stuff with Natush, when he was, more anecdotally, but he did record all of his stuff, because that's when they were doing the publishing for the different speciation. But like, he was talking about super tiny adults and making fun of all the Americans for having giant snakes. But that was the same way, where he was, carpets and all that kind of falls into the same deal, where like people were arguing with that guy who wrote the paper. He's like, no, I'm the guy. Like, I was there.
The guy who literally put his hands on thousands of individual animals across their range.
He's like, no. When you guys are referencing the paper, like, that's me. I'm telling, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. And he was the same way. They're tiny, in comparison.
That reminds me of that Instagram meme. Have you seen with Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin?
Yeah.
It's like this girl commenting on a picture of young Robert Plant saying, where can I find a guy like that? And then it's old Robert Plant on social media being like, hello. And she's like, no. He's like, that's literally me.
Yeah.
That's literally me in the picture you were looking for.
Yeah. And I just, I feel like rough scales and so many other species in general, not just, what we're talking about, but the hobby overall, I feel like could do a lot more with a lot less. And then, we see these Facebook groups of, especially the corn snake groups in particular, man, it's brutal. But there's, the beardy mom types that are like, you need to feed it every 4 days, and you need to do that until it's an adult. And then they post pictures of their snakes, and they're so morbidly obese, it's depressing. It's like you're doing the opposite of what you're wanting people to do. And you tell them that, and they lose their minds. They're like, I know what I'm doing, and my snake's completely healthy. And it's like, it's not. It looks like it's about to pop. It looks like a balloon animal.
Yeah, I think it's hard just because we're mammals, right? And we just, we've got this different metabolism. We're warm-blooded and all that. We think we're just, feeding is a good sign.
Yeah.
Well, there's also like a perspective thing of, I run into like the beardy mom stereotype thing. Like, those people are often single animal owners, and it like, not all those people need to own a whole collection of snakes or lizards. That's fine. But if I turn around, like literally, there's, I don't know, 40 lizards in my view right now, and then that way is a lot of snakes. But like, so when I have so many points of reference,
right,
to be like, oh, well, that gecko looks a little fat and this one doesn't, and they're doing different things in X, Y, and Z. Whereas, like, if you only ever look at one crested gecko for the next 3 years, you just think that's what crested geckos look like or what they do, and especially newer people without that frame of reference. Whereas, like, oh, how'd you learn a bunch about Conicus, or how'd you learn a bunch about Kenyans? I have a lot. And then I saw him do a lot of stuff over a long period of time. And so now I know, oh, that Kenyan didn't eat for a long time and it got pretty small and I was a little worried. I looked in the drawer and that is a pose that says, I'm about to tag something. So you threw a mouse in there.
Yeah.
If that was your only Kenyan ever, you may have really struggled with that, as opposed to one of 30 Kenyans where it's like, oh, well, 1 through 29, when they do the little S thing, they're definitely going to bite something. And this dude finally did it. So awesome.
Yeah.
Like that's a really hard reference to just know. You know what I mean?
It's really difficult too when it's maybe somebody you sold an animal to and they're thinking now that there's money involved, this person has an ulterior motive,
Right.
and that's to keep me happy so I don't ask for the money back. When, you know,
Right.
most of us, especially like, I mean, I'm a hobbyist breeder. I mean, I have a business, it's an LLC, and the IRS gets my taxes and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if I make $1 more, I'm happy because I'm just getting to do what I want to do. And now it's paying for itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in, you know, losing face or being dishonest over one animal sale, right?
Yeah.
But they don't know that, they're maybe guarded against some other bad experience they had or the like. So yeah, so we have this problem with roughs. People buy a male and it doesn't feed for 6 months, and oh, you sent me a defunct snake. I'm like, no, it's just doing what it does, and I'll happily give you one that's feeding right now, but I can't promise that it's not going to do the same trick on you 3 months from now as that one.
Well, and that too is that you can't dictate what the person you sold that snake to finds cool about snakes.
Yeah.
And like it or not, the vast majority of people that get into snakes early, it's because they don't have any legs and they wrap stuff up and look crazy when they eat stuff because they're snakes and it's awesome. Like,
let's film it and put it on YouTube.
But that's a huge part of snake. Like,
Sure.
Why are really big snakes cool? And it's like, oh, because they're huge and they eat giant stuff. And it's like, really, they do the exact same thing a king snake does, but in a retic package.
Rabbit screams.
But like it's hard to pitch the cool factor of, no, this is cool because of where it's from, or this thing that it does, or my rat snakes that tail rattle, or all these other things. And it's like, well, if you thought the cool factor of snakes was eating, you should absolutely get a rat snake or a hondo or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, but then, oh, this one's cool because I really love this color pattern and all these neat things I heard about. But then the thing I thought I liked about snakes was that snakes are cool because they're scary monsters that eat. And it's like, man, you picked the wrong snake. Like I got other stuff that does that, but this ain't that. But then you can't really, you can, as far as like how many morph market messages you're going to send to somebody, but like you can't control that once it arrives. And they're like, no, I thought it was cool because it like pops out of the sand like Tremors and eats the thingy. And it's like,
cool.
Yes. 3 times a
action figure in the enclosure with it. And it's
but I'm saying, like, that is cool 3 times a year. And then, and you're just, how to manage those expectations can be rough.
No, it's well said, Bill. That's absolutely right.
That's another point for rhino rat snakes there, Bill, because that's never going to be a problem. It's going to eat every time you put something in front of it.
Hey, and I got a little tarantula that's supposed to go to your house. I'll just get you a little bit bigger box and I'll put an AST in there and you can have something that eats every time just the same. It even eats the little fish that you like to feed your rhinos.
Yeah, well, that's proven to be a little more involved than I expected, because I got a group of guppies to start my feeders and all the females have died and the 3 males that I have are just loving life and hanging out.
I had rhinos for a brief while. A friend of mine loaned me a pair and I bred them. And then one of the babies got its rostral appendage stuck inside its mouth.
Oh.
I don't know how that happened. But I was like, hey, this is an unpleasant herp husbandry experience I'm having right now. But I don't remember if that one recovered from that or not. And this was before we knew about feeding them fish, but they were generally okay feeders. They were not easy feeders, that's for sure.
Yeah, I 2 nights ago, my wife helped me because of the PetSmart Rosies that I was feeding. One of the babies that I hatched out last year had some sort of subcutaneous worm And after trying an ivermectin topical solution, which didn't seem to do much of anything, granted, I didn't hammer it very hard, ended up just excising it and pulling it out. And that was a first for me. But that's why I'm doing the guppies, because I'm like, I don't want to have to deal with this or do this again. It sucks. But the I guess I bring my own rodents as well, so I like having control over the feeders and the quality of what's going in and out. So I'm gonna start trying to get some guppies going, so that next year when I have 2 clutches of rhino babies, I'm prepared. But yeah, it was that worm was wild, man. You see the little, the subcutaneous bump, and you're like, oh, it can't be that big, and freaking pulled that thing out and just kept coming. I was like, oh my god.
Oh,
It's like 2 inches long. It's insane. It's like an 8-9 gram baby rhino.
jeez.
It's been doing fine since. So, but
The dark side of herpetoculture. Worms infecting your snake via the fish.
yeah, it made my wife squirm a little bit when we pulled it out. It was I have it saved. It's in some alcohol in a little tiny jar. Souvenir. Conicus morphs though. What did we? I've seen the hypo stuff for sale on Morph Market and Caramel.
It's from Scott Miller mostly, I believe. I mean, I have some of his stuff, and I bred his males to some of my females this year. And I said, Scott, what do you sell these as? He says, hypo caramel crosses. And I said, well, what kind of gene is this? He says, kind of indeterminate. I mean, it's definitely heritable, but I guess it's not clear. I mean, I don't want to speak for Scott. He could say more on that. So I think Martin's spotted stripe is just about as cool a morph as there is, and there's degrees of expression in it. And he's got some animals that I think he's starting to call, oh gosh, I don't want to say it. I mean, I think it's named after one of the big cats or something because of the broken up pattern on it. And I've seen this look before, but he's gotten to the point I think he's pretty convinced it's heritable. And then there's aneries that I know Scott has, and I think Martin has as well. So we're missing the albino to really get things rolling.
Yeah, I'll have to look. I haven't seen the aneries yet. I'll have to do some digging because I'm curious. I love anery Kenyans are probably my favorite as far as the Kenyan morphs and stuff. Like just your run of the mill anery.
When you get that Holloway reduced pattern anery though with a really nice contrast, and it doesn't have to be like 60 or 70% white either. Just that nice chalky white. Man, I'm with you. Those are really, really nice. When we got those animals from Holloway, that was one of the things I went kind of long on. I've not done as well with breeding those as I had hoped to, but and I started mixing them a little bit with Cal Flames because I got one litter. It was really sensational, but then the rest has been honestly quite muddy. So those got wholesaled.
Yeah. Russians. What's your experience been with those?
Limited. I just
Kenyans and Conicus. I mean, they seem fairly unique compared to other sand boas.
So I didn't want to get Russians for a long time because sorry, I see my lights falling over here. Because I read that you had to keep them like in a wine cooler during the winter, and if you didn't, it's in the books. Like if you don't have them at 45 or 50 degrees like hognose, then they'll just waste away and die. And then Instagram's great, man. I mean, you found my stuff on there. I saw a guy had produced a litter of Russians, and he was in Florida. And I said, hey, man, do you have to keep these in a wine cooler? He said, no. So what do you do? He goes, nothing. I said, did you brumate them or cool them down at all? He goes, no. He says, I just treat them like any other snake, and I just feed them, and then they breed. I was like, oh, okay. So Amir had offered me some in trade, and started keeping those. But I've got a female that's probably big enough to breed, but again, she's going into her 3rd year, so I'm gonna wait. And the ones I have are all super blacks, but I just have 2 pairs.
Size-wise, are they comparable to Kenyans?
No, they're small.
Smaller? Yeah.
They're small, and they're more slender. So that female I have who's a big feeder. Both of the females, the males are like, so all iracines, especially the males, when I was talking to Nate Klee about this, there's just well documented going a year or more without feeding. It's not a problem. And these male Russians are the most indifferent to feeding, I think, of any snakes that I've had. They're like, hey, we're skinny. We got super long tails with big hemipenes, and we're just hanging out waiting until you tell us it's our time. That seems to be their attitude.
You have one mission.
Yeah, I think that's
Feeding
it,
is not
honestly.
it. No.
Yeah. So no, I've not done anything with Russians yet. And honestly, I just, I diversified with them because probably that's what I should do. If I'm going to be a sand boa guy, then I should have more sand boas. But and I do like them, but for me, it's roughs, and then it's smooth scales if I can get them going this year, and then Kenyans, and then Russians after that. So, and I haven't looked into getting any of the other stuff yet because I still have a day job, and I'm well up there in great numbers of snakes these days. So it's it is 25, 30 hours a week at least working on your snakes and rodents, and then day job, and you guys have families too. So yeah, it's a lot.
What about the John Eye? How do those compare to? Those look interesting because those look.
They are the sandworms of Dune. There's no doubt about that.
They remind me of the Calabar, like a weird mix of like if you took a Calabar burrower and mixed it with a any other sand boa type.
Listen, we're all just fortunate they don't get to be 22 feet long and the size of your thorax, because they would take people down. Right? They have the strongest feeding response. It's insanity. I mean, it is quite impressive. That said, based upon my experience with one large female, the male I have is a little puppy dog. I lay a dead mouse in front of him, and he's like, "Please close the door, close the drawer, come back later," and it's gone. But the female, oh man, definitely have that like nest burrower attitude, kind of like a king snake too. They'll just pin anything to the wall, whether it's a mouse or your hand, or she's not bitten me ever, but they start throwing coils every which way when the mouse is on the scene. And I often feed her live because that's what she seems to prefer, but she'll eat pre-killed too. Probably would do frozen thawed, but yeah, I hope I can breed her this year. She's 5 years old. I got her from Dr. J's Exotics here in Florida. I can't remember his actual name, but I've got it written down somewhere. It's Jeff Taylor. And I've since gotten a sunset male from Scott Miller.
Oh yeah.
And I've been adding some other animals. Amir had a coal black male, which he loaned to Ward's Reptiles and Ward's Propagation Reptiles, whatever. Yeah, and they used him as a sire, I think, with a normal female, and so I have some offspring from that breeding. And then I just bought one from Josh Markey. Josh Markey had some stuff on Morph Market, some babies, and he's not known for sand boas, but I was like, damn. I mean, he had one picture up representing the whole litter, and I was like, if that's a female, I'll take it. He says it is, so I got that from him.
Are those? You don't see those available much.
No.
No,
they're pretty pricey.
Is it like a sort of a rough-scaled python, not Conicus, but Carinata scenario where it's like they're not necessarily difficult to reproduce? There's just not a lot of them around for people to actually put together.
I think that's right. And, all pythons are CITES too, but I want to say that those animals have special protection above and beyond that because of some, nonsense aphrodisiac type stuff owing to them being the two-headed snake or something related to that. So that what's in the trade is what's in the trade,
right,
at least in the Western United States, unless people are going to go out and flaunt the laws and the like, which obviously have nothing to do with. But, I see that they're sometimes on like Canadian Morph Market or whatever that is. And I know they're in Europe, but yeah, I'm only got my stuff from captive bred producers here in the States.
Because I've heard sort of mixed things as well. I've heard or read at some point that those in particular were just a little more tricky to get to reproduce successfully. But I figure it's also a combination of just the availability not being there.
Yeah, I don't know. I talked to Dr. I think his name is Jeff Taylor, right? Dr. J's Exotics. And I did try to breed them this last year because she was 4 or 5. And I heard maybe sometimes you have to go 5 or 6. She didn't breed, but the male I got from Scott was kind of small, and now he's gotten a lot bigger. So I actually paired them up already this year. Wasn't meant to be that way, but I was moving things around, and I had an open tray in a freedom breeder. They're in like a 48 by 2 foot freedom breeder, and I was like, I'll just put you guys in there together for 5 months and see what happens. So. Didn't take that one too serious. See what happens. What happens when you become completely focused on one snake? And I love the roughs too much.
The going back to like, what were you keeping when you were doing venomous?
Oh man, I mean, so I was in Miami.
What was your thing?
I was in Miami and I had very little money, so anything that was cheap. So we started out with puff adders because they were $25. Regular monocle cobras were $45. Rattlesnakes were available like crazy in the trade then. You could get. I had a red diamond. Oh, no, not a red diamond. I had a red phase western. I had a prairie. I was just keeping these things as individuals. I wasn't planning on breeding them or the like. When I moved to Gainesville, I bought some eyelash vipers from Carl Barden.
Yeah.
Man, talk about difficult feeders. I mean, I was breeding African pygmy mice and, just like with tweezers and a little pygmy mouse pinky like this. And then the snake would take it and then you just freeze.
Yeah.
This hot room, sweat dripping down your nose. Don't want to touch it. 7 minutes later, the snake still done nothing with it and it spits it out. Oh my God. Yeah, squamager. I mean, I had Cape cobras, I had Sufans, whole bunch of different stuff. Rhinos and got into rhinos in a big way. Jumping vipers. I honestly think that's probably why I love roughs as much as I do, because they look like jumping vipers.
It's probably one of the closest things body type wise and everything to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I met him through jumping vipers. We've been buddies since 1994, I think. Yeah, because of jumping vipers, because he was at the Daytona show when it was in Orlando in the Twin Towers, and he had a price list on his table, including venomous, which you couldn't have there, and had jumping vipers on it. So I inquired about it, and I've been friends with Bill Hughes for 31 years because of that since. I've left that up.
Bill Hughes, who's in Vegas now?
No, he's at the Tennessee Aquarium. He's in Chattanooga. It's too common a name. Sorry, just putting up the lighting here. And I had oddball stuff. I had a Spitalaps. I had Walter Nesia.
Wow.
Desert Cobra. Just weird things came my way. Yeah, I think the last thing I had was the eyelash vipers. I didn't breed much. Oh, copperheads. I kept a bunch of copperheads. After that first copperhead I got from the guy the graduate student of my dad's, then I started keeping bred some Trans-Pecos. Those were fun. I really like those. And I now understand there's like a million copperhead morphs, but even though they're not hot, I still don't intend to go back to hot snakes. There's something. I mean, Bill, it's great that you keep them, but there's some. I still have every once in a while. I'm like reaching into a pan. I'm like, wait a minute. After 15 years of keeping venomous, I could have to remember that, like, I don't have to be as cautious as I used to be. So, I never, in all the years I kept venomous, I used hooks, I used rarely tongs, and I used tubes and garbage cans, and I never pinned anything, and grabbed it behind the head. Obviously, I tailed stuff, and I grabbed things when I was using tubes, but I think that's one of the reasons my hands have stayed in place.
It's so weird, right? You use tools that you're supposed to use and you don't have any problems.
Well, I mean, a lot of it was fear-based for sure, but here we are, like the thinking primate, right? And these are the most incredible dexterous instruments that evolution has ever created. And I hate to think of losing one to snake venom.
Tyson asked if you were still breeding African pygmy mice.
No, God, I haven't done that since the 90s. Those were cool, man. Those were so neat. I loved having those. I kept all kinds of rodents then, you know, like the zebra mice and dormice, just the little Russian hamsters. Those were fun too. But I kept most of those rodents just because I liked them. And then the pygmy mice just with the added benefit. I think I got all that stuff from Bill Hughes.
How were the pinkies and those? How were those in comparison size wise to like your standard?
Are you kidding? They're like grains of rice. I mean, not quite that small, but they're so small. I mean, the mouse itself without the tail is maybe an inch, you know? And they live communally. Like, so I'd have them in a 10-gallon. It would be like half full of pine shavings. And there would just be these just warrens and burrows and just networks all built in there. I mean, I felt terrible about cleaning it, which I had to do.
Right.
Because it was just a city structure they had built under there, and they'd be like, "Oh, here's a pocket of babies here, and a pocket of babies there." And yeah, it blew out of control. There were a lot of them. I mean, I was handing those things out like party favors back in the 90s. Sorry, Tyson, wherever you are, apologies. I took 3 to Kansas, where my mom was living, because she wants them. I put them in a deli cup and put them inside my jacket, and just carried them on the plane, because you know it was also the 90s.
Yeah. You watch like old movies like Airplane and stuff like that. Like,
that movie's great, dude.
The 70s and stuff, when you would just literally just walk into a plane with like anything and no one batted an eye at it at all.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I was a kid of the 80s, and I had friends bring things. Yeah, we won't even talk about it. I mean, explosives. People carried explosives on planes. My friend brought quarter sticks of dynamite back from New York. I mean, yeah. Sorry, we got off the rails here.
No, it's fine.
He was a minor traveling with his parents. No lie.
Adds up. Tracks. The what was keeping the Cape Cobras like?
Oh God, no. We'll never do that again. No. They were babies. And they were babies, and they were just unhandleable. Anybody I've ever talked to that's had capes, the consensus was almost always the same of like they're a handful. No, it's like these are going to kill me.
Doesn't
these
matter
are going
if
to
it's
kill
big,
me.
like they're like a notch below forest cobras in terms of just absolute chaos. And I love capes. If I was keeping cobras, capes would definitely be at the top of the list, because that's probably my favorite species.
Well, you're thinking of like an idealized like axanthic, or bright yellow one, and
I like the speckled ones.
Yeah, the speckled ones.
I like the heavy freckles.
These were just like the burnt mahogany with like a bad black band on them. They were just, they weren't even very attractive ones. I think I had them for months, not more than a year. And I was like, I had 6-foot albino monocles at that time. No problem. Piece of cake. Tail and a hook. Garbage can. These 18-inch capes, I'm like, I'm going to die. I got to go. So I did have a really nice snake room at that time. And it was just like vision cages and neodaches, or neodeshes, however everybody would like to say that. And it was like a rectangle, and it was a tile floor, and there was no escape. And so when something dropped and got out of control, I just leave. And I had French doors, and I could just watch out there and be like, all right, let's calm down. So I had a rhino viper that until that time I didn't know what they could do. Like, oh, they're just a bitus, and they puff and they get angry, whatever. I had one shoot out one of those visions at hip height, past my hip like an arrow. It must have traveled 3 feet out of the cage and flopped on the floor. It just by luck didn't collide with my pelvis. I had no idea they could do that. I had no idea. I was in my 20s. What did I know?
Yeah, it's seeing any species of Bitis do the things that people don't think Bitis can do is it's pretty incredible how quickly that switch can flip.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they go from being a slow slug to a levitating skyworm.
I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but that's exactly what it was. It was a 30-inch skyworm with multicolors on it. Very pretty.
Yeah, when they want to move, man. Especially like big gaboons and stuff. People are like, yeah, they're not that quick. It's like until you see them do things that you didn't think they could do.
Yeah.
Then it clicks. Then it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is a serious snake.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, again, I love that Bill's wearing the natural history T-shirt, but like, we don't have but like a sliver of an idea of the natural history of most reptiles because they're less studied than mammals and birds and things like that. And in captivity, what do we get to see, right? It's most of what makes for their natural history is not available to them. So yeah, all these books are great. I love the books, but they're only based upon the perception of a few people and several dozen experiences or hundreds of points of data, when there's been millions and trillions of points of data that we don't know about. So I remember seeing something about somebody finding scarlet king snakes in a flooded cypress dome at the top of a palm tree. Never would have thought they'd be there, but now that they've been found there, sure, why not? Why shouldn't they be up there? So you get all these categories applied, or animals put into categories in books, and again, that's good because that's what we know. It's based on what we know, but it's just not a complete understanding. So Kenyan sambos do fall out of trees with birds in their clothes.
You gonna start keeping them arboreally?
Well, you mentioned having a terrarium to like see the rough scale or give them a different appearance and stuff, and I've started doing more of that in later life. And right now I've got like a 75-gallon that's empty and it's got heat tape on the bottom, and I could do a lot in there just to have fun, to watch some of these snakes that you don't think of as climbers climbing. Of course, they'll probably do it while I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
So
Michael Gillen, our resident Canadian, he asked if you keep any rubber rosy boas.
no, I don't. And it's funny though, because when I was a kid, my mom said the one snake I could have was a rubber boa. I don't know why, but they're montane temperate forest snakes, and I just don't think I can do well by them in Florida. I had a rosy boa as a pet for a while, but to my understanding, and it's super limited, nobody's ever bred or is breeding rosy boas in Florida. And I don't know why I'm like just wed to the idea that if I have a snake that I have to breed it. But I think rubber boas are really cool. I just don't feel confident that I could give them the proper care.
They look like a lot of fun.
Yeah. But I think I would definitely have to have that wine cooler for them, right? I mean, they got to be kept super cool for a large part of the year.
Bill, do you have any rubbers?
I don't. Given where I used to live and where I live now, it kind of makes sense just because I can pretty easily almost freeze my reptiles if I choose to. But no, I haven't gone that route yet. But dude, the setting stuff up more naturalistic and seeing the behaviors that they don't do or can't do or whatever, that's the way to go, man. I got so many tortoises here and turtles here that climb and are semi-arboreal, you'd blow your mind.
Yeah.
And you got a redfoot. Our redfoot would climb up and down the stairs if you had a mouse and he could follow you. He don't care. Like that's their ability to do those things is not predicated on us in any way. They do whatever they choose to do.
You said it. Yeah.
I
would like to keep tortoises when I no longer have a day job. I think they're super cool, and kind of my general rule while I've been working. And then, for a long time I was into endurance sport and the like. I don't work for the post office. It's just like a cycling jersey thing. But now that I don't do that anymore, I'm pouring myself back into reptiles, like before I got into that for 20 odd years. And my thought is that when I have more time still come retirement, that I like to start keeping some things with legs that require daily feeding and daily care, which of course the snake collection does, just not individualistically, right? So yeah, I mean, I just think there's a whole bunch of different tortoises I would like to learn more about.
They all do stuff that everybody says they don't. Well, you're a Florida guy. All the memes that have gators and snapping turtles climbing fences and all of that stuff, and that's we make fun of our big common snapping turtle is named Voldemort. We make my kids make fun of the turtle. That thing's on its tail, all 4 feet pushed in, like pulling up to look at you, and he does pull-ups and he looks around. And then sees you and then looks at and give him a piece of chicken. And he's like, "Oh, cool." Slides back down. Like, that's that fully aquatic ambush predator that's at the bottom of the lake in the mud. Okay. Well, he just did a pull up. So, like,
has that alligator snapper grown at all?
That one a little bit. Its head is getting pretty thick, so I think it's on the trend. This year will probably be some size. It's still probably about the size of my hand. My medium one, that thing has been eating like nuts, so I think that, and not gaining any weight. So it's harder, I think, to like visualize the shell growth unless you do, 6 months later. What does it look? You know what I'm saying? Like
what Billy's doing with his mountain tortoises, where he's measuring.
Yeah, to me, that one still looks like the medium one. You know what I mean? Whereas like the small, like the head is noticeably thicker, but it's not the neck. Like it's not getting neck fat like a musk turtle. Like it's literally the skull. And so like that is so noticeable. It's like, okay, well, that's probably a boy then. And that's probably going to start pushing some size. Whereas like my biggest one, I know for certain it's bigger than last year, but what, an inch or two, and so it'll just do that forever until it's as big as it's going to be. I
need to do an alligator snapper episode. I've got so many questions as far as people that are breeding them.
Call up the folks in Asia, see what they're doing for food. It's all the same. They're better at it than us.
This is like, how do you have an animal that like doesn't come out of the water? So how do you know when they've laid? Like a lot of questions.
They still do nesting. I mean, you just keep them. They breed them the same way that we breed gators. You get a whole big pond full of them, and the edges of the pond are big enough for you to run the lawnmower and find the eggs, and then you get a bunch of chickens and chuck them in there, then just wait. It's this is literally Jurassic Park. Like I have 13, 14 dinosaurs over there, and they eat a whole lot of chicken. There's not a lot to it.
Just curious.
What do you do for the water quality, feeding them all that chicken?
I use the big box filters for ponds, and then for the big guys, everybody's kept individually, and so they're not together. And then I just have like what is that one? 150. I think probably the smallest stock tank I have down here is 60 gallons, and that's got little male Florida soft shell in it. Everything else is at least 150. There's 2 300s over there. And so, it's just, I just have an exceptional volume of water per turtle. And then each of those containers has its own filter. And so it's one of those things where like they're going to eat a piece of chicken, tear it up, make a big mess. That's gross. So clean your filters tomorrow and then, start the process over. When they're doing like the Missouri pelleted food and stuff like that, it actually doesn't make very much of a mess at all. It's pretty clean, other than like turtle waste. But the food itself, it's way more responsive than snakes. Like snakes, some of my big stuff, like they know what tongs are, and so they come at the monkey with the tongs. The little stuff, man, is tracking heat and scent. Like they don't have my opinion is they don't have they have no concept of me in relation to food. It's just heat and scent because they're small and I'm some abstract giant monkey. turtles and the really big stuff, like they absolutely understand, you know, like even our really large, I'm pointing like you can see, but you can't. Behind your floating head is probably 28-inch female soft shell.
Wow.
Like she knows what, like if you put black tongs down there, she'll ignore you. She knows silver tongs. She knows, like if it's me or my son is very tall, you know, that's when the heads come up. Hey, what's going, like,
Yeah.
they know that stuff's going on. As like the snapping turtles, the younger snapping turtles sit and are waiting to ambush. And if you don't feed them, they're not going to come looking for you. The very large alligator snapper, the really large common snapper, and the actual alligators, like they know what the monkeys are, and so they're looking for us. So it makes it a little easier. Like I literally hand them the food. If it's something with bone or larger and they make a mess and tear it up, whatever, then I'll just clean filters. But for the most part, if it's, you know, literal to them, bite-sized pieces of meat, I'm handing it to them. And so there isn't nearly
cleaner,
yeah. I do, you know, like you were talking, Justin was saying too about, you know, getting them naturalistic or what have you. To me, that's just burning calories. Like it is, I'm sure there's mental stimulation and enrichment involved as well, but like for little snakes, that makes me want to feed them more often because they can't afford to burn calories like that. But when you get into the boas and pythons, like I almost have to make my stuff do something so that they don't gain so much weight.
Yeah.
Just like
and I kind of treat the turtles the same way. Like, you know, that snapping turtle is utterly ridiculous, but like, so he's going to do a pull up and he'll rip, you know, a chicken leg apart or whatever. And so I give him, you know, a whole chicken quarter from the grocery store because they were on sale, and just let him make a giant, awful mess. Because it's forcing him to use those claws and do stuff as opposed to he would just eat bite-sized chicken nuggets if you gave them to him. You know what I mean?
Like a baby with a birthday cake.
Yeah. I make them do it. And the big snakes are the same. Like that's why really giant snakes are such a pain, is they eat giant meals, but then me and Indy, and she's very small, you know, we get out big old pythons and the retic and the berm and stuff. I'm like, nope, now you gotta crawl your fat ass in the yard and work some of that off. You know.
Good for you. Yeah, I had a boa tree for a while, and I need to get back to that. It was basically a giant branch that I shellacked and stained, and then put it in the stump of an old bigger tree, and I cemented it in there. And it was great. I put the snakes out there, all the birds, and the whole neighborhood go crazy.
Yeah.
It's since fallen over, and I need to get back to that because it's the
we do the same
real exercise they're getting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so,
and like, I mean, for the little guys, like, or not little, well, comparatively little, even how Justin was saying, like using those rocks or things that make them climb, like that's the only way they're gonna, you know, put those calories and muscles to use other than breeding. So yeah, I definitely get them out and get them moving.
Yeah, it's impressive how much muscle tone these animals keep, though, for living lives in captivity and in drawers and in boxes and the like. Obviously, it's not what it would be if they were in the wild, but it is impressive nonetheless.
Well, but you got to think though, like you were saying with talking about Bitis, you know, that probably is fairly close to the wild as far as not moving unless there's a necessity, you know, and then springing out past you, you know, there's nothing that says, you know, blood pythons or those, you know, big fat sausage snakes that they wouldn't sit in that, you know, palm oil plantation waiting for however long to get that rat. I mean, it's really the same process. But that's when you talk about fast and slow twitch muscle fibers, that's just a body composition isn't the same as us, you know?
Yeah.
Otherwise you couldn't go 7 years without eating, but same idea.
Yeah, you know, in retrospect, I should have anticipated something extreme was going to happen with that snake, because I remember now, not only was it huffing and puffing, but it had reached the level of like a high pitch whistle. or shriek. That's how
Oh, wow.
pissed that particular snake was that day. And I don't know why. I'd had it for a long time. But stupid.
Yeah, but
monkey
when
did
you're,
not know.
I mean, that's kind of a thing as well. Like when you talk about those animals, like that too makes me think of physiology. Like you need to work it. That thing has to work itself up in order to have that final fling. Because if it sat placid, from placid to fling, that's a whole other muscle structure than from pissed off in the rattlesnake S to fling. You know, that's very different. That's why things like stiletto snakes freak people out so much. Is whenever I've seen the slow-mo videos of people that get hit by those, and that to our silly monkey brains, that snake isn't flexing and doing the things you would think
Right?
to
No.
pull its head back and poke that stiletto into you, because that's not how our musculature works.
Yeah.
And so you're sitting there like, oh yeah, it's annoyed because you're holding it. Every snake gets annoyed when you hold it. And then they go that way, like a stereotypical rattlesnake. And then you see that neck hook and it's like, oh, that your muscles aren't supposed to do that. That's why there's a hole in your hand now. Damn it. Like, yeah.
That's
Bill's been tempting me with an alligator snapper for like 2 years now.
How big is this alligator snapper?
It's little.
Well, that'll be a long time until it's big.
Yeah, that's what he keeps saying, and I know that that's the case, but I couldn't get the wife on board with a redfoot tortoise, so I highly doubt an alligator snapper is going to be any different.
Well, I mean, you have to leave something to your children, right? So this is what you're building up, is these animals
that's
that will
one of the
outlive
reasons I'm not allowed to have.
Sorry, I know this has nothing to do with Conicus. I apologize.
Nothing to do with what? Oh,
Conicus.
hey, what's to know, man? That's awesome.
I'll give you $5 to let it bite your nose.
No. This is the one that bit through my finger.
What?
Through your finger?
I
through the soft
mean,
part?
sort of. No, definitely nail and pad.
Oh my god.
Yeah. See, his head's really, that skull is going.
Cool, dude.
So I definitely think he's in line for some growing.
Oh, he's training on you now. Look at him.
Oh yeah, he's mad. I was doing a public charity show for a zoo, and it's kids listen, adults don't listen.
Especially when you're holding something like that in your hand.
Well, but adults are always, and I look like this, and so dudes, whenever I do this kind of stuff in public, dudes want to get along with me or whatever. And like, no, I got it. I know, that kind of thing. And I was letting people like, oh, hey, take a picture, look at the dinosaur, that kind of deal. And I would set it down, turn it, and explain how to hold. And then we had a bigger one so I could show you where to put your hand so you wouldn't get hurt, these things. Man and his wife. Yeah, I got it. Cool. She's going to take a picture of me, do this thing. And I'm like, hey, these like for real bite. You got to listen to what I'm telling you. You don't want to get bit by this. And yeah, I'm good. Cool. And he watched the lesson of how to hold it, took it. And then when he turned to the wife for the picture, he turned it toward me and it just went on my finger. And she took the picture and I just stuck my hand behind my back and my daughter was with me. And I was like, hey, we're going to put the snapping turtle away now. And I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't paying attention or whatever to my hand. I was just trying to keep it hidden. And I apparently was just bleeding all over my pants. And the man's wife was like, set the turtle down. We're leaving. And the guy was like, no, I got a selfie like this, raising charity for the zoo and like raising money. This is really cool. Thanks for coming out. Like he's trying to talk to me about this zoo charity. And I'm like, yeah, love the zoo. Come here every year. It's so great. And I had like my hand tucked like behind my jeans.
Bleeding out.
And it's all over my pants. And my wife is we had a huge setup. We have a lot of reptiles. And she holds big lizards like babies. And some other woman was talking to my wife, and she goes, I think your husband is bleeding. And
Again,
turned around,
as he
and
does
it's
that.
it's just all over. And that was this turtle.
That guy right there.
That particular pointy beak.
So he just
right there.
grabbed you. He didn't hold on though. He just
he just don't do that. And
feel like you
honestly, man, when they're annoyed like this, it's not I've never. I mean, that's the only one that's ever bit me. But as far as like, they get annoyed and go at the tongs, or if we scrub them and stuff, and they do not want to be scrubbed most of the time. It really isn't it's not like the stereotypical snapper. I'm going to grab and hold and never let go. The common will definitely do that.
Oh, yeah.
These guys are definitely they know, however you want to say that. That thing pokes a hole. Like, that's for real.
Yeah.
Common snapping turtles bruise and it hurts, and I don't want to do that. That thing went top to bottom through my finger. It was a bad day. Yeah.
Did you end up getting it like x-rayed or anything?
No.
I
cleaned it up, put some glue in the holes, and whatever. You can't play with dinosaurs and not have dinosaur things happen. It's just how it goes, man.
So cool, man.
Can you show your tongue? No, I don't have a good enough light, huh? Don't bite my phone.
So if you put that on the ground right now, like, do they just sit there? They don't, like, at that size, are they actually mobile at all?
No, the little guys, he'll just sit. The big guys will back up, and all of them they leave. They're trying to leave. They don't come at you or anything. The common snapper, when he's annoyed like this, if we get him out and change the filter and all that, he usually backs away. But that particular turtle, like, if you clean the filter, take it apart, clean it, do all the stuff over here, we're gonna go back over there, put all the crap back in there. He's just chilling on the floor, right? Mm-hmm. Super annoyed, mouth open. I don't want to do this. When we put all the stuff back in the enclosure, he's coming. Like, we go back in there. Like, he's aware, but that he's trying to go in there. These guys know. These guys sit and they're mad, and as long as the weird monkeys are walking by, they're just going to stay mad. Mm-hmm. They for whatever reason they don't get over it.
It's just a bizarre life those things live, of just existing.
And they have quote unquote closely related animals that are entirely different in their behavior and probably in many aspects of their natural history, just adapted for different things.
Speaking to a person heavily concerned with fish.
Yeah. So when I was right out of undergrad, I was involved in a project in South Georgia and Southern Alabama where we surveyed 30 creeks for the fish that were in them. And then we came back and surveyed the same 30 creeks for mussels. And I know the freshwater mussels, their larvae are parasitic on fish. And so that's what's the interest in the project. And one of the creeks we went to was Little Uchi Creek, and we were surveying it for the fish, knowing we'd have to come back later for the mussels. And the way you survey for the mussels is you throw quadrats out. People call out numbers because it's got to be randomized. And then you use your hands. And wherever the quadrat goes, that's where you have to go. And when we surveyed it for fish, we found 3 alligator snapping turtles, including one that was about 20 pounds, came out from the bank of roots. All the while knowing, like, we're going to come back to this creek a month from now and just get in here.
Yep.
So nothing happened when we came back, but you're literally just like reaching into the darkness, looking, trying to feel a clam, and if there's a clam, what kind is it? And you write it down on the data sheet. Yeah. So, but we caught 3 that obviously we just let them go. I remember 2 were very small, about like the size. I think one was about the size that you're holding. Another was smaller still. And then there was the one that came out from the bank that was like 20 pounds. So, yeah.
So now, have you always been a Florida guy?
Yeah.
School to work to everything?
Yeah. I grew up in Miami, and then I moved to Gainesville, and I've been in Gainesville since. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I understand that north of I-10 that it gets cold, and even sometimes snow falls.
There's a whole world up there. Yeah.
This is the limit to my distribution. Yeah. So it's supposed to snow in Tallahassee this coming week. That's coming week tomorrow. Yeah. That's crazy.
Wow.
So
Do you get out and do much herping?
I don't, man. It's a regret. You know, I did some in college. I took herpetology with Jay Savage, and then we went herping on Loop Road with Jerry Johnson and Brady Barr. Brady went on to do a bunch of stuff with Nat Geo back in the day. Did a little bit of it kind of around the graduate school years because I had a bunch of friends who were herpetology graduate students, but no, not too much. I got into the cycling in a big way and the running in a big way, and it just ate up about 20 years of my life. So, and then now I've got so many herps at home that I find spending a lot of my time just caring for them and improving the collection, improving the conditions. I just built 2 big cages for the boas, so built the stand and all that. So yeah.
Yeah,
You know
our
how it goes.
buddy Harry Claiborne, he lives in Tallahassee. We went to Apalachicola National last year, and I'm dying to go back. It's such a cool place.
I've been out to Torreya, like in the ravines, and done some herping there way back when. I remember going to a spot with Kenny Crisco and saying, "Hey, I found a copperhead here last year," and it was the same spot, copperhead. That's pretty neat. So like what Bill was alluding to, you know, these animals find a spot and they sit there for long periods of time. So.
Yeah.
Well, gents, this has been super fun. It's a school night for
been.
me. I got to get back to that museum in the morning and all those fish in jars. And
If
then,
people have any questions or want to get a hold of you, what's the?
I mean, I'm Bo Eriks on Instagram, BOAERYX, and I'm on Morph Market as well. My email is boeriks@gmail.com. So yeah, I'm an open book. I'm always happy to talk to people who are as interested in snakes as I am.
You have any Conicus available at the moment?
I do, and I need to post some more. You know, I'm getting to that point of like, hey, these were going to be holdbacks, but oh gosh, it's 2025, and I want to make these pairings and so forth. So yeah, I've got some of those hypo caramel crosses that litter of 8 that were a little snippy, but I kept almost the whole litter because I really liked that cross, and I'm probably gonna make some of those available. And I think I have 1 or 2 up right now on Morph Market. So yeah, and then hopefully by June, quite a few. I'm gonna probably pair up 7 or 8 females this year. Should produce some spotted stripes of my own from Martin's lines, but crossed with other stuff. So
oh yeah, go.
No, it'll be fun.
Well, this episode was brought to you by Fulvius Apparel, fulviusapparel.com. A bunch of new stuff got added earlier this month. Go check it out. Currently have a giveaway on the Instagram and Facebook page. Go check that out. And then Cold Blooded Caffeine, best coffee around. Use the code SMOKE. Should get you 10% off your order. Use the code THN at fulviusapparel.com. Get 15% off your order. The exclusive promo code for THN listeners and viewers like you. Bill, thank you for filling in for Phil.
For sure.
Filling in. We'll be back Thursday. THP is happening. And then Phil should be back next week. So we will see everybody later. I'm sure Flippin' 10 is going to be happening soon. I know they're long overdue. I don't know what those boys are going to talk about during the winter, but I'm sure they'll find something. I think there was talk of like a salamander episode or something happening, but time will tell. We'll see. I'm sure they'll let me know, and we'll post about that when it's happening. So thank you, everybody. We will see you later.
It's a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.